Welcome to the Ecosystems Relationships video series. On this series, I'm going to be talking about population ecology, community ecology, and even a little bit of general ecology, but targeting middle school students, and especially those which are using the Summit platform and trying to pass this content assessment. However, even if you aren't using that and you need to learn about biotic versus abiotic factors, the levels of ecological organization, the types of things that limit population growth, like competition or other limiting factors, and the relationships that exist at community levels between species, like symbiosis, competition, and other relationships like that, like predation. And make sure to stick by and watch this series because it will help you out. On this first video, we're going to be focusing on the first objective, which is how the non-living and living parts of the ecosystem all matter to help the populations of living things living inside of it. So when you hear the word ecosystem, that basically made of two parts, the living and non-living parts. Biotic factors include things like the food availability, predator or prey numbers, the numbers of producers, diseases or parasites in the ecosystem, species which are important and could alter the entire ecosystem, which are called keystone species, the availability of mates. All of these are examples of things that are directly connected to the organisms living in the ecosystem. Meanwhile, the abiotic factors, like the amount of water, which is very important, whether it's from precipitation or the humidity in the air or the amount of water that's available in the ground, temperature, another important one that relates also to the amount of sunlight and energy that the system receives, the amount of nutrients such as phosphates, nitrates, nitrites, carbon dioxide, and oxygen, which are needed by producers and other organisms to actually build the molecules of life, toxins or the pollution of that's in the ecosystem, the availability of shelter. All of these things are abiotic factors, which also have tremendous impacts on the nature of the ecosystem and the living things living in it. Now, if you're looking at ecosystems, there are different levels of complexity or organization that we classify. And at each higher level, you get more and more complexity in the systems that come out of it. Just like within an individual organism, that could also be broken down to levels of organization because organisms are made of systems, which are made of organs, which are made of tissues, which are made of cells, which are made of organelles, which are made of molecules, which are made of atoms, which are made of subatomic particles, which are made of quarks, which is basically energy trapped in space-time. All of those layers below the organism, as you go up and up each layer, things get more and more interesting, and you have new emergent properties that arise. Right? Likewise, at the ecological levels of organization, things above the organism level matter a lot. So, for example, populations is when you have a group of organisms of the same species, like all the wolves in the forest. All right. Now, they have awesome relationships that weren't possible until you got to that level, like competition for mates or collaboration for hunting in a pack or avoiding the hunters by being part of a herd or all the kinds of competition for food and things that happen within the population. Likewise, that is the layer at which evolution takes place because organisms can adapt to the environment, but only to the limit of what their genes let them do, what they're born with, right? But new adaptations that change the entire species are things that depend on many generations and across the population, across the time. And that is something that emerges at the population level. It is a huge characteristic of life. Likewise, when you get to one level up and include not just one type of organism, but all the organisms living in the ecosystem, all the producers, all the consumers, all the decomposers, the wolves and the deer and the grass and the fungus and the bacteria and everything else that is alive in the ecosystem. There's a ton of awesome relationships that we are actually going to talk about in more detail in the last video of this series, where we talk about community ecology relationships, like symbiosis and competition and predation. By the way, back to the population level, videos 2 and 3 of this series are actually going to focus on that, specifically about the factors that change how populations grow. Then you have the ecosystem level. The ecosystem level is the biotic stuff and the abiotic stuff together. So it includes with the living things, the water, the air, the soil, and everything else that is part of the ecosystem, but it's not living. Now, they are closely knit and interconnected. You couldn't talk about life without those things, certainly, but you also can talk about those things without life, because soil is built by life. Erosion is helped by life. Water, water plays with life plays on that. And there's a whole different lecture series we talked about that, right? About how matter cycles and energy flows through ecosystems and how life affects all the biochemical cycles there is. In fact, as an example, when they reintroduced wolves in the Yellowstone Park in the United States of America, the river changed directions. All right, it changed the flow of the river. What does that have to do? How is that possible? Because the wolves eat the deer. Less deer, less consumption of the trees, which means less competition for things that actually use the trees to build dams, right? And then those organisms actually end up changing the flow of the water of the river. Also, the changing trees also changes the erosion pattern because less trees means less roots holding the soil in place. Changing the erosion pattern changes the deposition pattern. New sediments get placed in other places, and all of a sudden, there's a new sandbank that the river has to go around. So all of these crazy changes to the ecosystem happened because wolves came in. The variety and quality of life increased also among other species other than deer and elk. Everything got changed by the presence of this wolf. So that's why we mean a keystone species, right? It's a key species that if you change it, it would change the entire ecosystem. So, but I wanted to tell you that to show you that even the river, the abiotic parts are changed because of it, right? Now, and because of the erosion, the soil got changed too, right? So all kinds of parts of the life get changed because of it. Now, biome is basically a larger ecosystem. An ecosystem can be as small as a tree trunk that fell over, and now you have a rotting tree with new life coming out of it, or as large as an entire forest. But even within the forest, you're going to have different sections like the canopy or the understory. Now, a biome is a larger ecosystem or a major habitat of the planet that contains a specific pattern of smaller ecosystems. Like a taiga would be a type of forest, right? That includes meadows, that includes the canopy, it includes the understory, and it has the wolves, and it has the deer, and it has all the abiotic factors living in it too. Now, the things which are possible at the ecosystem level obviously are even more complex. You have ecosystems' ability to survive because of its diversity, which is a completely different series we get into, and that is at the ecosystem level. But finally, at the level of the world, if you put all the biomes of the world together and the way they interact, you make what's called the biosphere, which is all of the things in this spaceship Earth that we have, which is traveling to the universe. It is the only place in the universe that we know of that has life like this. You could technically consider the space station that's in space as a separate biosphere, but it's so interconnected, independent about what's happening on the ground, and fairly close to it too, that I wouldn't quite call it a separate biome. But maybe if you go to Mars one day, we can call it a different biosphere. But right now, the Earth is all we got, so we got to take care of it. In the next video, we're going to be talking about population ecology a little bit and the factors that affect how much a population can grow. I'll see you guys then.